Aside from containing variables at indexes, an array contains a variety of pre-made functions with which you can manipulate its data, like adding or removing elements at certain positions. Let's take a look at a few of the most basic ones right now. First of all, we're going to create a new array. We're going to name it names. And this is also one thing that I want to point your attention to, is that we are always going to name our arrays with plural names. In here you can see we have names. For example, we can have people, values, months. It's always going to be ending with an S or an ES. It's just for us so we can visually see that some variable is indeed an array, and then on that array we can use all of the methods we're going to explore right now. The name is going to be an array, and then let's add some values inside of it. First one, let's do John this time. We can have Bob as well, David, and let's do Mark as well. Okay, we have 4 male names. Now, the first method we're going to explore is going to be array.push. Let me write that right there. Array push. Great. Array push is a function that adds a new element containing the entered variable to the end of the array. Let's write it down. Adds a new element containing the entered value to the end of the array. It's hard to see, so I'm going to close this and then span this in 2 different lines just so it's easier to see. Great. Now, how does it work? Well, we have the names array, and then what we need to do is just call the push method on it. That's going to be names.push, and then in there you specify any value. In this case, let's add Dean. And after we do that push method, we can console log the names so we can see if the value was indeed pushed. As you can see, our array now has 5 elements, and the 5th one is Dean. Great. There's one important thing that many experienced web developers don't know about the array.push. What is the return value of the array.push? Many would think that the return value of the push would be an array, now including the element we pushed. Let's test it out. So I'm going to console log that to get the return value of what the push method is returning. And let me comment this out, save it, and take a look. We get back a number 5. The return value is 5. Why 5? Think about it. It turns out that the array.push returns the length of the array when the element is pushed. We can even store it in a variable, like this. Const length is equal to names.push and then Dean. And now we can console log that length. As you can see, we get 5. That means that names.push doesn't return a new array, rather it just returns the length. In most cases, you don't want to use that length. So the only thing you want to call it like this, but then it immediately changes the names array like that. The return value in here is not important. The important thing is that indeed it changes the original array right there, and then the value is added. We're going to leave this here, and now we're going to go to the second one on our list. It's called array pop. Pop method does quite opposite from the push method. It deletes the last element of an array. That's it. Since we're doing deletion, basically the only thing we have to do is just do names.pop and call it as a method. We don't have to provide any value in because we're just deleting. Now, if we call this, take a look, we get back, well, nothing because I didn't put a console log there. But if we console log the names, you should be able to see that the array stays the same as it was on the start, which means that it did successfully delete it because before we added Dean there. So we added Dean and then we deleted Dean. If we want to see it in action without first pushing Dean, take a look, it removed the mark. So it removed the last element from an array. This time, the return of the method is not the final length of the array, as it is with the array push. Rather, it's the value of the removed element. Let's take a look. You have it in case you need it somewhere. Let's console log it and let's take a look. As you can see, we get back Dean. As it is case with the previous thing, we can also store it in a variable and call it something like removed value is equal to this. And now we have access to the removed value. In this case, that should be Dean. How can this be useful? Let's say you're deleting something. You want to delete the last to-do from the to-do list. You pop it, right? But then you want to show a message showing the to-do saying do this was deleted. And that's where you can get the value of the thing you just deleted. You need to like alert it to the user. This thing here was deleted. And that's where we can use the removed value. Great. That's all that we need to know about the names.pop. Now let's move to the next one. Array shift. Shift works almost exactly like pop with one major difference. It deletes the first value in an array and moves the rest backwards. So if we do this, we can say deletes the first element of an array, just like that. And then we call it names.shift. And let's take a look at the output, console log, names. As you can see, we have Bob, David, and Mark. That's because John was deleted from an array because we called names.shift. If shift is the sister function to pop, unshift is that to push. So we're gonna explore array unshift, and that adds a new value to the start of an array. That's it, instead of the end, right? Push adds to the end of the array, and unshift adds a new value to the start of the array. So can we somehow simplify this? Adds a new value to the end of the array, and this one adds a new value to the start of the array. Okay, so how does it work? Well, in the same way that push does. We just call it names.unshift, and then in there we pass the value we want to add in. For example, let's add Dean one more time, and then I'm gonna console log it. So that's gonna be console log names. Great, you can see we have Dean at the start now. And much like push, it returns the new array length. So if you're interested in the return value of names.unshift, as you can see, it's also gonna be the new length of the array. Not that useful, you most likely just wanna call it, and that's it, it changes the array. And two final basic array methods are called array splice and also array slice. People for decades now working with JavaScript have been confused by these two methods, splice and slice. I think you can see why, right? They have really similar names, and once you understand what they do, it's not gonna be that hard. They are a bit more sophisticated, but don't worry, we'll walk you through it. The splice method allows you to splice values into the new array. Its first parameter determines where the new elements are placed, and the second, how many after that point should be deleted before placement. And then all the parameters after are the values you want to push in. It is harder, but let's take a look in action. So I'm going to call names.splice, and then in there we specify where do we want to add new element. Let's say that we want to add them at the second index, so that's going to be 0, 1, 2 right there. And then we say how many elements do we want to remove. Let's say 0, and then we say what values do we want to add in. Let's add some names. Let's do Jenny and Johnny. Great. Now we splice that, and now let's console log the array. After we do this, you can see that now our array has Dean, which we added right there. Then it doesn't have John because we removed the first element here. But you know what? For simplicity purposes, let's comment out all of these other lines just so we can work with the initial array. Let's see what happens. As you can see, we have John, which is here, Bob, which is also here, and then before David, so before the second index, because this is 0, 1, 2, before the second index, we delete 0 elements, so we delete none, and then we add in the middle of the array Jenny and Johnny, as you can see right there. We have John, Bob, Jenny, and Johnny, and then we continue with our array David and Mark. Great. For example, we could also put 2 here to delete 2 elements. In this case, we would have John, Bob, and then we have Jenny and Johnny, but we deleted the last 2 in the original array. Splice is quite powerful, but you need to understand how to use it. Most often, you'll use it just to add elements in the array. So this is how it's gonna look. You can also use it only to delete some elements. So for example, if I do start at position 2, remove 2 elements and then don't add any, it's also going to remove them. Take a look. Now we start at 2, so there's going to be 0, 1, and then it removes 2. That's going to be David and Mark. That's it. It is a bit harder, but once you understand how to use it, it's going to be quite useful. Again, in real life, you use to remove some values or to remove and add, but also just to add certain values inside of the array, not at the start or at the beginning. Great, that's it. And then finally, we have the array.slice. This handy little piece of code can make a new variable that contains every element in the previous array. For example, in here, we have names array. And then let's create a new array. Const no one likes John, just like this. And now in here, we want to have all the elements in this array, in the names array, but only without John. How would we do it? Well, of course, you could copy the whole array manually, paste it here, and then remove the John. That's fine, but if you have an array with 200, 500, 1,000, or 10,000 elements, you don't want to do that by hand. You want to use handy array methods. We're going to do it using slice. The only thing you have to do is use names.slice and then specify the start from where you want to keep copying it. We say 1 because you start from here, and we're going to take everything else other than the 0 value. Now let's take a look at the newly created array. No one likes John. As you can see, we get Bob, David, and Mark. You can see array slice is pretty useful if you want to create a new array, but only copy some parts of the previous array into it. Starting with this index, we can also specify the last index. So that would be ending at 3, that would be 0, 1, 2, 3. That would be still the same thing, but if we set 2, that would only take the Bob and David. So we can say no one likes John and Mark. That's a lengthy name, but now you can see we get only Bob, but if we extend it to 3, that's going to be Bob and David. So from first one to the third one. Great. This is how array slice works. I'm going to bring this back to what we had just for simplicity purposes and comment this out. Now we forgot to add comments for array splice and array slice. Why am I adding them? Well, because I'm going to give you this little file so you can play with it, test it out, and see how it works. We're going to use it as a reference to future videos. So what does array splice do? It adds new values in the middle, or let's say in any position of an array. So it basically adds values not only to the start or to the end, but you can add them in any position of the array, and you can even delete. So it adds or removes. It adds or removes values in any position, or let's say from any position of an array. And then array.slice copies certain parts of an array into a newly created array. That's it. Now you know what each one of these basic array methods does. You can use them, you can play with them, test it out. And in next videos, so every next video in this section is going to be in detail about more complex array methods. So we're going to have one video for array.map, array.forEach, filter, reduce, join, basically every array method out there. And these are going to be more complex. So that's why we're going to explore them in more detail in separate videos. See you in the next one.